Hi, buddy. It's Jeff here. Just answering another LinkedIn post. I like doing these video replies to LinkedIn posts because it's a lot easier to do than to write it out. There was a question or a comment about having loan words from English into French. Adapting, yeah, trying to avoid actually using English words while you're translating to French, and then and everything. And there are a bunch of examples in one of these posts. I don't want to repeat that, but I want to talk about the whole thing of loanwords and all that, and a lot of examples just because I've been living in France for like 32 years, and I had a bachelor's degree in French. And I came to France and did my master's degree at a French university in linguistics, and then my doctoral work also in linguistics and actually on loanwords um, into French Creole, so from English, and all the fun things that goes, all the different adaptations and semantic and phonological and syntactic, all those kinds of different tweaking that happens that people do when they adapt a language, adapt a word into another language. Okay, kind of adapt it, and then adopt it. I don't want to go all that because you have to read my whole thesis about that, but I want to talk a little bit about the whole thing of you gotta have the history of kind of the French language, and in the 1530s, the whole thing of Francois the first deciding that Low Latin would no longer be the language to be used; it would need to be French, the French at that time, and that would begin to wipe out all the dialects, or the regional dialects, I'll call them. I mean, they're all dialects, but the regional ones that weren't his. Let's say it that way, okay? Um, and that began the whole thing that has happened for centuries. And the whole thing now, too, if you come to the French are very chauvinistic about their language, but actually a lot of people out of the other countries are chauvinistic about their language too. It's not just French, but the French does have the French do have their French Academy. It's been around since like the 1630s, off the top of my head. So it's been around for a while, and there's a history of that whole having the dictionary and all that, and words that are accepted and words that are not accepted. It's like every year. I remember when green beans haricot vert came out, and that whole thing, and all that came in is like all being discussed. I can remember these things, words that are coming into the French dictionary. It's all being like, you can't let weekend come into the dictionary. I remember all these things because I've been around for that long, and living in France and all that. But I do want to cover kind of the current state. And I remember when I was doing my doctoral work, I would actually be doing survey works in the subway system, kind of doing my surveys, and not surveys for my doctoral work, just for fun. I would actually I had a little notebook. It was a kind of actually just a calendar, just a calendar. And every time I heard this word, I'd write down the date, the sentence, and who it was. I was collecting this little book of things. This certain word I was looking for because um, I'd never told anybody about it. Now my fiance, one day, she was kind of watching me, and then I heard one of her family members say it, and I would have to do is I have to keep the thing in my mind, I was going, and it was a word that when I was in high school that the French teacher said don't use because that's not the real French word. Okay, I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you what this is. I'm going to give it away, okay? So I was told in high school that you should never use the word réaliser, to realize, to realize, because the French term is se rendre compte, okay? And se rendre compte de, okay? Because s'en rendre compte. And I always kept that in mind. But then it's funny, was in France, I kept hearing people saying réaliser all the time for that same meaning. It's like, we were told not to do this. Don't use it. But I keep hearing it. And it's funny because I kept hearing from native French speakers, not people that actually, some people had, one of their parents was English, but they didn't actually speak English at home. I thought, so I started taking notes. in the subway. I hear it in the subway. I hear it everywhere. I hear people do it. But I had to do is I keep it in my mind because I was kind of doing the linguistic field work, but not letting people how to do the linguistic field work. So I'd write it down every time, the name of the person, the date. Well, the date was in the calendar or whatever. Write it down and the sentence that came from because I wanted the exact sentence because I want to write a paper about this at some point in time. I haven't written it yet, so I just want to do the video about it. And that was 30 years ago, okay? And one day my fiance, I later married she said, "What are you doing? Why are you writing down that stuff on that thing? What are you doing?" Because she was seeing that I was kind of after 5-10 minutes, I'd write this little thing and I'd take these notes. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And one day I'd actually tell her what I was doing because I was doing field work of this thing, and I had to tell her what I was doing. It's just like I'm doing field work with you and your family and everybody else in the world, actually in the subway system. Because I was an itinerant professor, I would be going around and teaching people, professionals and stuff, language, and so everywhere I'd hear it is I had to write this thing down in the street. I'd write down this because I was hearing it so much because I wanted to know what it was, and I actually came down to figuring out, the kind of situations. So I'll give it away. Okay, is that you can use réaliser now for the past 30 years in every context except one. Except one. That one you're all wondering what it is, right? You can use it, je réalise que, da 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 da. J'ai réalisé que, on aurait, all the when you have the que, that's okay. And other ones too. But you can't say, do you realize? You can't say that. You can't say, tu réalises? You can't say that. Vous réalisez? You can't say that. You have to say, mais tu te rends compte? Vous vous en rendez compte? You can't say réaliser in that situation. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it's kind of a question with an imperative. It's that kind of question. And it doesn't work because there's not a complementary phrase. And that's the only one I found I couldn't do it. I still have to investigate it more and to kind of look into it. But that's kind of my 4 pages of sentences. I had 4 pages of entries of all these things, all these examples from all these native speakers doing this. But I was told we could do it. Language evolves over time. Okay, language evolves over time. That's what we're coming down to here on this. And that's why I told story, because this comes down to the whole thing of loanwords, because it's a loan word. In the end, it's loanword. And British does have a couple different meanings of realize, which have the same meaning actually as in French. To like realize a structure, to realize a building or something. I mean, to finish it, to make it, get into production. Whereas we don't really do that in English, American English. I'm sorry, North American English. Maybe in British, I don't know about Canadian, but American English just doesn't use that. Okay. But as over the years, I was taking all these notes and stuff, and I've worked in a lot of companies and institutions and governments and governments and customers, a lot of companies in France for 30 years. I spoke at home and spoke French at home for 30 years. It was my primary language, actually, for a good chunk of my life, almost half my life. Though I spoke French to my children, but when they came along, I spoke French at home, and in all walks of life. So, in everything, I can talk about anything except a few comic books, that kids grew up with, because my kids are grown up now, so I've kind of gotten used to it. But there are kind of a few jokes I don't get. It's pretty minimal. So I can pretty much understand everything else. I go to any conference or anything, watch any TV show or any film. It's not a problem. What I've seen though is that there are people, and it's pretty common, that want to kind of show off that they know a few words in English. It's kind of like this, I'm proud kind of thing. And I actually see this in, colleagues. I'm not going to say people's names here. Now, actually at work, I've been working in software companies and other companies pretty much for 30 years. And people will use English words because that's the English terms are the ones that are actually used the most because these are companies that usually do work with international customers and international relations and all that and cross-cultural things. And so there are English terms that are used for a lot of things. And so what happened is that the English term will be used. And the English term usually is the shorter version, and there is not an equivalent actually in French. And so you're going to have to invent the thing. You'd have to be inventing the thing all the time, all this time for some things. But I've seen a trend. I'll be honest, I've seen a trend about this, especially the past 10-ish years, maybe a little more. And I'll refer back to a book that I would recommend that you all get. It's by Michael Piccone, Picone. Okay, Mike Piccone, but it's Michael, his name and thing. And it was actually it was published in 1996, and it's called Anglicisms, Neologisms, and Dynamic French. Now he actually did his doctoral thesis at one of the universities in Paris. I think it was the Sorbonne off the top of my head, in the 1980s. And I had contacted back in the 1990s, and he actually sent me the microfiche for his thesis. I've got the microfiche for his thesis, okay? They had to go down to the library to actually read the thing with and all. I've got the actual thing in an envelope, okay? And then when his book came out, I reviewed it. And so if you want to see the short version of it, it's up at the Journal of French Language Studies. And it's actually my list in my publications, and you can go read it. It's a few page review, and I explained about what he talked about Anglicisms and basically loanwords into French, and he gave a lot of good examples and gave some a lot of context words and advertising, marketing stuff, a lot of billboards and you know at the train stations and stuff, and on the walls and the subway and all that. And it's a good book, and he gave some examples of the things. And I don't want to go into all the details because I'd sit here, for hours explaining this, and that's not the goal of this. This kind of points you things. That's a good book. I did the review in 2001. The book came out in 1996. Okay, so Michael Piccone, Anglicisms, Neologisms, and Dynamic French. I can't remember the editor, the publisher. You have to go look it up. I just remember the dates. Okay, so, and I remember the publication date of when I got published, when I wrote my reviews. But what's good about the book is they gave a lot of examples, tons of examples, good stuff. And when I was reading the book, I was comparing it with my own experience, having had lived in France during the same period and since, because he actually returned to the United States, and he's a professor of French at one of those universities. I think it's one of the universities in Alabama. So he's been there for about 15, 20 years again, but he had been here for like 10, 15 years in France. And because when I was doing my doctoral work too on loanwords, I was looking at all kinds of things. I think I even cited at least his thesis, because I needed his thesis to actually cite in my thesis. So, and his book came out after I had, 15 years or more after. Yeah, it was a long time, at least 10 years after I had written mine. So I couldn't cite the book because he hadn't put it out yet. And his book was a translation in English of what he had written in French, with updated. But what I've noticed over time, and noticed in work, like I've mentioned, all the things of that people will use words. And in the software industry, a lot of the words are just, it's common in English and in French. And I can tell it's kind of a pain, I'll tell you, to go when you have to go. I have to go sometimes give like presentations to the French works council or workers council, what do you want to call it? In French is the comité d'entreprise, and then there's the other comité, which is, it keeps changing all these names of the things, but security and psychology and work and stuff for workers and stuff. So, but every time I had to go to these things, I gotta Frenchify everything. I gotta Frenchify stuff that actually isn't in French, and that's such a pain, I tell you. So sometimes I just get around of not doing it. I just kind of, here it is in English, and I'll present it in French. It's just so much faster, and use a loan word from here to time. It doesn't matter. That's okay. But I have always, and I've lived here for a long time, and I did have to go through the cycle of having to say everything in French. In my thesis, I couldn't use the loan words. I could talk about the loan words, but I couldn't use them in writing. I had to actually write it all in French. But I could only cite the loan words as loan words in my examples. But that's it. But I had to explain everything in French, so I couldn't use loan words in my explanations. Okay, so that's kind of a key thing. And I had been, brainwashed to publish everything in French for about 10 years, 5, 10 years, because I had to prove that I could write in French. And I did a pretty good job of doing it. Okay, I did a really good job of doing that. But after a time, I just found that it was, wasn't gonna that my reader audience was too small, and so I'd have to actually do it all in English. And I made some choices, and I did some videos and explained that, but about why I did that. Though I speak French all the time still, that's I speak it, but I just don't publish in it unless I have to, and I'll write to it in French when I have to at work, because usually what I have to do is if I write in English. If I write in French, then I gotta translate in English for my people, the other, for the Germans and stuff, because they don't read French. So so I gotta do this all the time. I don't want to translate. I'm spending my time translating things I've already written. It's just write it in all English, and we'll have to deal with it. But it's interesting to see my colleagues in different companies over the past 30 years, or institutions. I'll say institutions because not always, business companies, but maybe governments and stuff, and nonprofit associations, and NGOs and all this kind of stuff that they'll use that are French speaking. I don't want to say just French because you got Belgium, you got Luxembourg, and and you got a lot of African countries and too. So I don't want to rule this out. The francophonie kind of thing. They'll use English words. They'll drop some English words here and there to kind of. God, what's the word in French? It's frime. I got to think what it is in English. They just kind of show off. Okay. I see this. In TV interviews and radio interviews and stuff. And it's gotten to the point, I'll tell you the truth. I got to the point where I see people, colleagues, going to these, TVs and stuff. And like every other sentence, there's an English word in it. And it doesn't need it. You don't need the English word because the French word works. And the French word is actually as short as the French English word. And it's the same amount of syllables. It's like 2 syllables. But they're kind of dropping this English word from time to time. It's kind of like, it's cool, we don't need it. And then sometimes you get to the point saying, gee, if I was a French speaker, listen to this. It's like they're dropping this English word, boom, 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 every sentence. Come on, folks, just stop doing it. But they're doing it because they hear it in English all the time. They hear the word and it's still used, that it's become normal for them to use it, even though but they have to speak in English to other people. So they're, they're going back they're playing this linguistic gymnastics in their brains, whereas they're not linguists. So, so it's kind of like, why switch? Just use it while you're speaking French. Whereas I kind of like the gymnastics because I'm a linguist. I'm just like, hey, I can jump back and forth, code switching, boom, 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 code mixing, boom, 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 boom. It's kind of fun. This is kind of fun thing I like to do, right? I do it with my kids all the time. It's like back and forth. It's like, ooh. But so it's not just, write a thesis. I do this all day long at home. But the thing is that there is a tendency to use the words depending on where you're working and kind of your social status, your role, your job role tends to be executives and kind of fix that will drop those words. But not everybody. Actually, a lot of people will still use it even in product teams and stuff because they're the words that are if the products are written in English and all that stuff, then you're going to use the English words. You're going to use the terms. You're going to use those things because that's what they exist. You're not going to sit there and Frenchify it just because we got to speak in French. No. You're going to just drop it. It's just this is called code mixing. And code mixing is you're talking along French, bam, word, bam, bam. And that makes sense in a software company where you got feature names, and it's usually the feature names. It's people, places, or things. These are what we call named entities, and usually tends to be feature names. Terms, feature term. It's terms that are feature names and all these project names and all this kind of stuff. But you see this also too when people are going on radio interviews and television interviews talking about the company and talking about what we're doing, because a lot of the words that they're talking when they're talking about other subsidiaries that are in other countries, they're using these words all the time, so they're speaking English to other people. So what they're doing is they're just dropping these words into while they're speaking in French to explain it in French to other people, but because they're using these words all the time in the business context and speaking English. So, and there's a kind of thing like this. You kind of want to show that you know English and kind of stuff. I mean, there's that bit of that too. You can kind of feel it. Okay, I can just feel it. Um, whereas if I would be speaking in a French TV, that whole thing would be in French, 100%, because I want to prove that I don't need to speak English. Okay, and I'll Frenchify everything. I will do it to the just to death, because I need to prove that hey, I don't need to speak English. Okay, so it's kind of different background. That's kind of cool to deal with that. But this does affect this is really what sociolinguistics is all about. It's really interesting. The whole thing of sociolinguistics and dealing with language choice. And go watch my video that I talk about what is a language, because I did about that and I explained a lot more about that. But what is language? And now we're coming to language, and I discuss about language selection, language choice, why people choose a language, a certain language, a certain variety. And now we're drilling down into why do we select certain words and terms, words while we're going through in certain terms if we want a 2-word term, a 3-word term, whatever, and why we use those. And this is kind of getting into the really super sociolinguistics kind of thing. And it's sociolinguistics mainly, a bit of psycholinguistics. I don't want to explain the two differences of that because we'll be going here for a while. But this is all about speech acts and pragmatics and all kinds of things around that. And I don't want to start citing all the different people that have worked right now this, because I can, but just this is not to do a bibliography of all the people that have written about these things going back 30, 40, 50 years. Okay, but this comes into play. So now we've got some examples here that people are talking about in these LinkedIn posts about need to Frenchify. I'm going to take a word. I'm going to call it to Frenchify the words and make the French equivalents out of this, because the European Commission or the European government wants us to do this. And so does actually the French government, because we kind of make sure you can't speak. And there's all these laws and stuff that you have to do this. And actually, companies actually get sued when they don't do it. If they're writing all this stuff and they're giving all their human resources information to the employees in English, they're not they're writing in French, so they get sued for it, and it causes legal battles, and people are just it's just you can follow all this. This happens, but the and this is because we're going to have to go to give these presentations to the French Works Council, the Comité d'entreprise, and I have to Frenchify everything. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, and I just kind of like blow it off. That's where I'll actually use terms, because it takes me so much work to translate the whole thing. You know what I do is I just I'll tell you what I do sometimes. I actually remember going, I remember when my wife I have to drop her out at a meeting or something in the evening, and I'd drop her off, and I'd be out in the car translating this thing at the last minute because I was told I got to get a presentation tomorrow, and I get it in French, and I'd be translating this whole thing. And I'm an expert in translation systems. Come on. So I have come to the point where I just give them the equivalent of a Google Translate thing. Okay, but we have our own. The company I work for, we have our own translation system. I use that. It's kind of just the easier way to do it. They give them that and say, if you want the French version, that's one. And then I'll come with an English presentation. And I just say it in French. Oral presentation in French. That usually does okay, because they're pretty happy. Because that's better than sometimes you get a vice president that doesn't speak French very well. They come and they present in English, and it's like, hey, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. Well, he's saying I don't speak French. So then you got to have somebody has to, this just gets to too much tension. And so just kind of peace be with us. Speak it in French. Say it in English, no big deal. Hey, run it through the translation system. Hey, that's what you get. We're all used to kind of Google, right? So I'm not saying I use Google, but the equivalent of that, the equivalent of quality. But the whole thing with these adapted loanwords, and all trying to find the equivalents of these things. I use playlist, okay? There are the French equivalent playlist, but I write playlist, and I actually put an E at the end of it. playlist, okay, because that's what people say, okay. And I don't care if we get other words for it that have longer terms and stuff. That's not what people use, okay. Um, Not well, those are all the people I hear using it. So a lot of it comes down to is you want to use terms and things, the words that people around you use too, and there's a bit of that. And people do want to use what they people that they're kind of their friends and their family and their coworkers they use. You just want to use the same terms and stuff. Go watch my video about what is language because I talk about idiolects and I talk about patois, I talk about communities and stuff, and that all plays into it. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff about this whole thing about how this plays into dialectology and you could even do the dialectology of enterprises and businesses because it's sociolex and again I can go to this a lot more. I do mention that in that video, but I'm saying here you can do this actually in different social circles, which jobs and professional thing is another social. It's a domain. Okay, it's a domain, and this is what we call diglossia, where there were a few, Joshua Fishman and all those in the 1960s, 70s. They're talking about diglossic situations and diglossia. You got different domains and work domains. It's not just social status with a minority language and a major language. You can have domains of education and professional and certain domains where you're going to be using one language, another one. You're going to be using one variety in one variety in one situation context, and you're going to be one variety in another. And it comes into like nannies, where we've got parents of different languages that live in another country with the nanny of that country, and you get the kids grow up in like 3 or 4 languages that parallel, and they can flip back and forth and all these languages because each context is different with the person they're speaking with. It's kind of in certain countries that kind of happens a lot. But the thing that I just kind of want to see here is that I come back down to the whole thing, loan word thing, is there's so much of focus. If you've got to do the French version of it in each language, you've got some of these languages that do have academies, like France does have academy, and Israel has an academy. Spanish says it has academy, but you don't really hear, it's not so much. And then you get the people on the other end of the spectrum, and like the English speakers don't give a rip. They just don't care about the language. But they do. But they don't. There aren't any rules. Yeah, there are. But there aren't any rules, okay? Not like the other languages have all these rules. They do have the rules. They're not described in a way that you can actually, you have to go find them, okay? And a lot of them have to be learned individually. And I don't want to go into all that kind of stuff, but right now here, don't have the time. But you don't have the time to listen to me, okay? I have the time to say it, but you don't have the time to listen because you won't listen to the whole thing because I do that. I give you another lecture about this stuff, but that whole thing in addition here. But I'll say that there's a trend. There is a trend in this whole loan word thing that I've been seeing more and more of the past decade, and we're in 2022 right now, okay? And that does come into play with the whole thing of the choice of words. And it's more choice. It's not just choice of language, it's choice of words. This is vocabulary selection or vocabulary choice. Call it term if you want to, but it's easier to call them words. That's what they are. And those can depend on domain and depend on a lot of factors. And people will do whatever they need at that moment in time to say it. Okay. And if the moment in time says you want to keep it in French, you do it in French. And the moment in time says, hey, I'll just use the English one just because it's faster and all that, less syllables. Linguistic economy, so people are going to pronounce what's easier and easier to say. They're not going to spend more time thinking about it in their heads and translating or doing. They're going to just use whatever. And it's faster because you're using it all the time in English. You're going to just pull out in English and you're not thinking, just slot. Oop. Boom, drop in the slot. Kind of like playing, arcade games, put the money in the slot. If you're going to go buy, a ticket somewhere, put the money in the slot. It's a slot machine, kind of like playing casino. Ding, ding. A slot machine. It's just a word when you're playing. I don't play casinos. But I watch it in the movies. I've never been to Vegas. That'd be kind of interesting, but Las Vegas. But it's these. Oh, I do go to. Okay, my kids and I, we do go to like the local. In French, it's the fit foreign. Okay, it's the kind of the local. Darn, what do you call this? It's where they come and they have all these like games and stuff, and you have the things with the plush animals, and then you gotta put the money in and try to get the aim the thing down and grab the plush the kind of the teddy bears and stuff and drop it, and you can or shooting, doing all the darts and stuff, trying to shoot and pop the balloons and doing all that stuff to win prizes. I can't remember what these things are called in English, but kind of those are examples of some of these examples of these things that I will do this and use these things and all that, and it's kind of these are kind of some examples of stuff. But I just want to say that the whole concept of language is not. Um, we can't run to the. It's really difficult to say that we can institutionalize and harmonize and standardize a language across all different fields, and everybody has to do this. People will use what's best for them at a moment in time when they need to use it. They will just do that, and they'll not use it if it doesn't seem to be valuable. And if people now, I can understand why you don't. The French, and especially the Canadians, they're fighting to have the French equivalents because English is so domineering and dominating that it'll roll over everything else because it's easy because you can invent terms and words and all the time. I mean, I invented some things actually for a master's thesis. I invented this whole former lexifier language acquisition. And I had to create the equivalent of the French one. It was kind of like I was kind of debating which way to want to say it. This thing, it was kind of more of a pain in French compared to English. It was like bam, I threw it. Just say it. It's easy. But the thing that you want to consider is that there is this trend of this linguistic economy that happens, and people will make choices. They're going using the word that's easiest to use at a certain point in time for that individual situation and context. And they may, in a different context, do it differently. I can see people that if they're speaking in one context, they're going to do it one way, and they're speaking in another context, they're probably going to use a different choice of words, depending on a lot of factors and variables in that moment in time. And there's a lot written about this. We can't go into it here. Again, this is going to go too long. And I want to keep you from, turning off the video. So, but thanks for listening this long. And thanks for considering this. And if you really want to dig your teeth really deeper into it, you can kind of read my thesis. But I'm going to warn you that it's a few hundred pages long, and it's written in 4 languages because I had French Creole and English and French, and then I had to do some glossary things. So this is kind of another code. It's not language, another code. And the problem I'm going to warn you with is that all those international, and I had international phonetic alphabet fonts that I used, and then they disappeared, right? So I didn't convert the thing into a PDF before that, and now I have all this. I had written, it was all phonetic alphabet, and so I'd have to go back in right now and insert all those things, get back in there, and I don't want to do that. That's so much work. I could probably do some character string searches and stuff to find all the characters and stuff of all these different sounds that were in this phonetic alphabet to kind of do search and replace. That's still going to take us some time. I just don't want to spend the time. It's going to be quite a few hours. That's why I'm laughing about it, because I didn't want to do it. I just kind of have it pop, and I just let all you struggle with seeing all these funny wingdings of characters for all my phonetic alphabet stuff, because I haven't reconverted all these things. Yeah, when I start hearing people complain that they want to read the actual phonetic characters, then I'll deal with it at that point in time and see if someone wants to do it for me. So, but the problem is they can't do it for me. They're gonna have to come to me because I'm gonna have to tell them what the sound, what the symbols are. So that's gonna be fun. Yeah. And I have to go back and try to remember. Darn, what was that? What was that symbol for that sound? It's been like 30 years since I've actually done an analysis of it. So yeah, that's fun. But the majority of it's still readable. You just kind of imagine if phoneticians and phonologists, they can kind of figure it out. They just kind of can guess what I'm saying because I was kind of explaining what the sounds were too, not just putting the character in IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet. So that's my thoughts about this whole thing of um, loan words and using words. And again, there's no hard and fast rule to any of this. There are, we claim to be, okay, let's call it regulatory affairs. You got to do this and you're supposed to use this. But there's no police for this kind of thing, except when you're doing the French Works Council, and you have to do it, and then they'll flag you if you don't do it in French, and you kind of cause other things. But there's no policing of this, and no one actually really cares, to tell you the truth. And it's feeling, and even my kids, they're dominant French speakers, and they still use English words with their friends that don't understand the French with English word. But because the kids do gaming, they do play at consoles, they use English words too because that's what the games are in, or the games are at least the words that they use are actually in English sometimes. So basic stuff. So there are words that are kind of common that are always used. And it's funny that I'm the only one using the French words when I find it, because my kids and all their friends aren't using. They're all using this other word that I've actually used a different word for because I really want to know they use the French word. And sometimes I just I try to work too hard at it. That's why I'm laughing because I'm probably more French than most French people are in some stuff. But this is a reality of biculturalism and language choice and things where you can flip back and forth all the time. I do remember language I dream in, because I can dream in different languages. Kind of depends on the topic. So thanks for listening. Thanks for commenting. Some of you might say, hey, it was too long. Yeah, but we're explaining it and got to give a bunch of examples. I'm giving you tons of examples here. And telling stories about examples. You just can't tell the story so short that you can't. That has no value because it's kind. You got to feel the history of it when you're talking about it, which you don't get it when you're writing. It's kind of like a dry explanation, right? Whereas this is kind of putting into context on each one of the examples. So that's the thoughts, and maybe we'll have some of the other comments. I'll come back with some more thoughts. That's how it is. This is all but a dialogue is. Just like if you do all the coffee break. I love having coffee breaks over linguistics. And I get some friends and colleagues say, yeah, I would like to have. It's always good to have kind of fun about linguistics and history and stuff like that. It's true. It's true. A lot of this stuff is all intertwined. So, in education, history, education, linguistics, politics, they all kind of work together. And you can't just isolate them all, and they all kind of fit together. They do all interplay, and so that's the thing. Then maybe next time I'll do something on I've been learning about Indian caste systems, so maybe I'll do something about that and how that affects terminology. So, and words choice and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be the next segment, maybe, or maybe something else. Thanks for listening.